How are you doing, guys? Welcome back to another edition of the Athletes Hub, another weekly football roundup. It's international break, so that means it's a boring week in football terms. But yeah, joining me to discuss all the latest ongoings and news in football is Mr. Flexx.
Yes, how are we doing, guys?
How's it going, Flexx?
Yeah, not too bad, my man. Not too bad. As you said,
Yeah.
we got International Week upon us. So,
A
yeah.
boring weekend ahead. A boring weekend ahead, that is for sure. But listen,
Uh,
guys, we want to try and make it entertaining for you as possible. We've got a lot of topics to dive into today. Do you know what? Before we actually started to kind of think about this week's sort of discussions, I actually, over the weekend, I looked at Frank Lampard and looked at Coventry City. A really good win away against, I think it was in Millwall they played in the Championship. And Frank Lampard's always kind of divided opinion as a manager. Again, great football player. Again, your club, Chelsea, a legend at Chelsea. But he's also had managerial stints at Chelsea and also at Derby County as well, and now at Coventry and Everton also. Again, 9 games, no losses, 5 wins, 4 draws. A pretty decent record to begin with, and he's doing quite well there. We look at Frank Lampard as a coach and as a manager. What's your thoughts on him? Because again, he divides opinion. He's English, want English players to do well, but in the Premier League, he's kind of struggled when it comes to the crunch moments, as they say.
yeah, he has struggled in the crunch moments, but it seems like he's coming out trumps at the moment at Coventry. So it's one of those things where you look at his career, especially at Chelsea, he came in when they had transfer embargo and all of these different things. So, it wasn't the easiest of starts when he came through. And then, of course, you've got the expectation of maintaining kind of what he achieved during that period there. And it's a bit difficult because Chelsea was not in the best state at the time. His second stint when he came back round, we had the huge squad with players that were, told to, change in a different change room, train in a different, all kinds of stuff. We still hear these things taking place today. But look, he's doing well. He's gone to a place where he can, kind of build his career. We know that he has a pedigree for the Championship because he did so well at Derby, again, with limited resources and things like that. So we'll see. Right now, Coventry
Is Frank Lampard a good coach? Like if we talk about top coaches, good coaches, English coaches, would you put Frank Lampard in that same bracket?
It's hard to say because what defines a good coach, right? Typically.
Well, listen, you could say that the likes of Neil Warnock, he got his teams over the years promoted to the Premier League. Frank Lampard hasn't overseen a promotion to Premier League. You mentioned Derby County, got to a playoff final and he lost it. And people would argue that as much as at Chelsea, he had a limited budget at the beginning of his tenure there. When it came to Everton and also his second stint at Chelsea, when they were struggling, he wasn't able to turn it around. So if you compare him to the other English coaches, who have been able to get their teams up and running in the Championship and promoted, if we say Frank Lampard's a great coach, like would we put them in the same brackets as like Neil Warnock, Alan Pardew, maybe Eddie Howe, that type of bracket?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard one to call because, he's still young in his tenure. He's still young as a manager. So I think only time will tell. And I think it's only fair to allow, time to play out on this one, So I wouldn't want to judge him so soon. He's probably only been in the game over the last, 5 or 6 years compared to the likes of Neil Warnock, who's been doing it forever. Do you see what I mean? So it's not necessarily fair to, compare it in that way. So we'll see how it goes.
It's true. But you'd also like say as well that maybe Neil Warnock's not had the luxury of managing a top club or the biggest clubs such as Chelsea and obviously going to Everton.
We say that, but again, when he was managing Chelsea, we have to remember transfer embargo. He had no resources. It wasn't even limited. He had no resources. So
what did you think about his second spell at Chelsea after who was it that got Graham Potter got sacked? What did you think about it?
It was a temp job, so we can't. Again, he's in there to hold the fort down.
Do you think he held the fort down?
Look, mate, the club was on the ropes anyway. Do you see what I mean? So for me, it's not like he was just there as a placeholder, keep things ticking over. He knows the club well. He knows some of the players. Just come in, keep things ticking over until we can get a replacement through the door. So it's not nothing. You can't really, I would say, a manager who's doing a temp job, they shouldn't be judged on the job they're doing. It's just a temporary role till someone else comes in. So for me, I just let that slide.
Yeah, no, I think Frank Lampard, again, great footballer. And also, I think Frank Lampard's a good coach. You don't do what he did at Derby, almost getting them promoted and not be a good coach. I just feel like maybe, as you said, at Chelsea, Chelsea's a tough club for anyone to manage, even the most experienced managers. So I wouldn't necessarily judge him too much at Chelsea. But again, he had 2 spells there. One spell was obviously limited because of the transfer ban that they had. But also, when he did bring in players the following season, he did find it difficult. And again, coming back in 2023 to manage them when Potter got sacked, again, the results were, they were difficult. But I think Frank Lampard's a good coach and he's doing well at Coventry now. Maybe people might say maybe the Championship, that's where he should be, because in the Premier League, he's kind of struggled most of the time. But in the Championship, he seems to be getting the team up and running, playing good football, and also scoring a lot of goals. So I agree. I think it remains to be seen how he gets on there and what his career holds. But going back to the Premier League, again, I think Arsenal fans watching this will be quite happy. Last 2 weeks have been great for them. To a late win at Newcastle and also beating West Ham at home quite comfortably. And Liverpool losing against Palace and also against Chelsea, your club. I know you were quite happy about the game on Saturday. The title race, listen, we're in October now, I get it. But do you feel like those 2 wins for Arsenal, those 2 losses for Liverpool, do you think that was a big, like a big statement by Arsenal over the weekend?
I mean, it's like you said, it's early to call simply because, we're only 7 games deep. But it just goes to show that, you can't write no one off. It's too early to call anything, and I'll give credit to Robbie, Arsenal Fan TV, because he's been saying this for the longest time that, it's too early to call it, So, yeah, fair enough. Arsenal sit at the top of the tree with a point ahead and a decent sized goal difference. But again, it's still too early. We need to get to that December period, and then we've got January with the AFCON, and then we'll see where the chips fall, and that's where things get tasty and quite interesting. So, yeah, look, a point behind, potential, champions is nothing, to be totally honest. And then you've also got Tottenham and Bournemouth for a point behind Liverpool and 2 points behind Arsenal. So, like, anything can happen. City 3 points behind. It's still wide, like, if that makes sense. So for me, there's nothing to see here at this time. Yeah.
Do you feel like, even though you mentioned Stalker earlier, do you feel like Liverpool losing the last 3 games in a row, obviously one in the Champions League against Galatasaray, do you feel like there's a bit of concern there? Because I remember watching Liverpool in the first 2 games and thinking to myself, they've led both games, quite comfortable in both games, and all of a sudden Bournemouth come back and Newcastle come back. I know they're going to win the matches, but it seems like Liverpool have this soft centre and they've got all these amazing, great attacking players, but it still seems like there's a bit of concern about the balance of the team and how they cope with transitions in particular. And the game on Saturday against Chelsea, it was like a basketball match. Like, it was literally end to end. Great for us to watch, but if you're a Liverpool manager and you're trying to, you're going for a league title, you've got to be a bit more difficult in some phases of the game to play against. But it feels like Liverpool are great attacking, but you can still get at them defensively, if that makes sense. And those 2 matches at the beginning, for me, I said it before, I don't think a team can keep doing that for 38 games during the season and win the Premier League. Last year, they got away with it because the other teams were nowhere to be seen. But this year, despite their signings, I still feel like there's still a bit of concern. And I know they went for Isak, but when you look back at it now, you're probably thinking maybe Mark Gahey might have been a better or more of a priority in terms of a signing.
Well, I mean, in hindsight, right, you would say, should have went and got a defender, because right now, that seems to be your problem, But again, it's still early. They've signed a lot of players. They need to gel. They need to, get it right. And look, they're 1 point behind Arsenal, and they still haven't really got out of second gear, So what happens when it does all click and come together? How does that look? And it's the same for Arsenal as well. To be fair, Arsenal have signed a couple of centre-backs, midfielder, a striker. What does it look like when all that gels together and comes together? Tottenham the same, so United the same. So we're still looking at all of these clubs where it's like, okay, look, when it does all click and it all does come together, how does it all play out? And that's what we're waiting to see.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I think because Liverpool, I think they won winning the Premier League last season has given Arne Slot a lot of time because he did it in his first season. It's very rare that managers come to the Premier League and win the league in the first year. I think Ancelotti did it, Conte did it at Chelsea. So I think that alone has given them a bit of time. But with all these signings now, it's going to be interesting to see how they get on for the rest of the season. But on the shout out Bournemouth, a great win against Fulham on Friday night. Antoine Semenyo, listen, Ghana. Black Star have got a superstar there, great footballer. And I think Aurelio's built a really good team at Bournemouth. And they're not really spoken about as much. They're kind of under the radar a bit. But looking at that Bournemouth team in recent years, you don't want to go and play against Bournemouth because he's got them drilled. They've got Semenyo, who's been an absolute superstar in that team. What have you made of Bournemouth so far?
Yeah, look, man, they've just continued from where they left off pretty much. And to be fair, we all thought that there might be a drop off simply because they lost a load of key players. They lost is it Housen,
Yeah.
Kirkes, these type of players, which were, one of the first on the team sheet. But seems like they kind of have a formula and they know what they're doing over there in regards to the players they sign, the players they let go, and the philosophy overall of how the club is, ran and how the club and how the players play, and it's working a treat for them. It'll be interesting to see if they can maintain this type of pace throughout the 38 game, footballing calendar, because, this is where, we see a lot of these teams like Bournemouth, Palace, they might, be off to a good start. And then before you know it, a couple of injuries here and there, or a couple of games where your squad size can't really fulfill, let's say the December period, then we start to, separate, the teams that have, the serious wage bills and the serious transfer spends. That's when you start to see the difference. But if they're able to somehow, maintain a clean bill of health and in January, maybe top up where it's necessary, then we could be in for an upset where it regards, top 8.
All right. Do you think Bournemouth could push for the top 8 places this season?
Hey, it's not out of the realms of possibility, right? But again, it all comes down to injuries and, how the squad survives, those heavy periods. And as you mentioned, Semenyo being a player that is key to the Bournemouth side. Again, we've got the AFCON that comes up, so how do the likes of Liverpool, Bournemouth, Tottenham, just to name a few of those teams that have, these players, we're looking as well, Brighton, they've got a few players over there that would be going off to the AFCON. How does that work? You got Newcastle, they've got Wisa, they've got Watamada, but if he gets injured and then Wisa's out at the AFCON, how does that play? Because Gordon's not a striker. So there's so many factors.
Even Palace as well. Palace they've got Ismail Assar, right?
Palace have got Ismail Assar there as well. We've got all of these different things. So for me, I find it's going to be interesting. I'm intrigued. This is blockbuster type of stuff, man. You know what I mean?
People definitely argue it's a lot more exciting for the league because, listen, when we were growing up, we had the top 4, and that top 4 didn't change, did it? It was United, Chelsea, Arsenal, Liverpool. I think nowadays that kind of spread to a top 7, top 8 now, and anyone can almost kind of compete for those places now. But yeah, I think the AFCON point you mentioned is a really good point because those teams, I think African players coming into the league more often now has made it a blessing for managers who've got great talented footballers. But when these tournaments occur, that's where it gets a bit tricky for them. But yeah, Semenyo has been outstanding. Even Justin Kluivert, he's been great as well so far.
He's been phenomenal, man. He's continued from last season. And, a lot of these players, I just wonder, because, what happens next season? I know Semenyo signed that top up. Kluivert is there. But, these are players that, they have a future outside of Bournemouth, to be honest.
Yeah, of course. This Bournemouth, this is no shade on Bournemouth. Bournemouth are a very good football club. But we all know when you exceed the expectation and you get to a certain level, other teams will be in for these players. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're going to be interested. And these are talented, young, great football players. So, Bournemouth are a great team, but at the same time, we've seen, like you mentioned with Kirkes and others, they've also gone on to sign for other clubs. So we're not going to be surprised if clubs are sniffing around these players, to be honest. Just before we move on, quick one on sort of Fulham. Because I mentioned AFCON, I remember they've got Bassi and Iwobi, who are both Nigerian.
Yeah.
And it seems like Fulham have kind of are this team in the last couple of years where they're a good team, but they're not pushing as much as they can push, if that makes sense. They're kind of steady in the league.
It is interesting, right? And I just always hoped that Fulham would be able to push on, and bring back days where, if you remember when they win the UEFA Cup
Yeah,
and stuff like
yeah,
that. So, I was always in my mind thinking, man, like the squad is decent. They had a decent run last season. Maybe this might be the season where they can potentially push on, but it just hasn't fallen like that for them. And then I'm also seeing that, Marco Silva can also be a potential replacement for Ange at Nottingham Forest. So,
yeah.
you look at that, that's also, you don't want to lose that manager because he's performing well, and you just don't want that to be the case. So Fulham is a bit of a, I don't know, they are where they are, and they kind of like it there. There's no way I can put it.
True. I mean, it's a nice, comfortable place to be. Fulham look like a good. I don't know. You look at Fulham, and it seems like they're a nice club to play for, a nice club to go and watch as well. They just have that feeling that they're just a nice football club.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We touched upon Big Ange there, actually, and we spoke about this when the news got broke, when the news broke about him joining Forest. And we said that as much as his philosophy is clear, it's exciting football, attacking football, that this man's record in the Premier League isn't great. And the Forest fans now are clearly frustrated by the start they've had. They haven't won any games so far since he's taken over, lost again at the weekend to Newcastle. Do you think there's a danger that he could actually be sacked before the end of the year? Like, if we're thinking about it properly, do you think Ange could actually lose his job after just coming in? Do you think he'd actually lose his job before the end of this year?
Man, with Marinakis being the chairman, it's not beyond the realms of possibility.
That is true, actually. Yeah.
Let's put it like that, right?
That guy's a maniac, honestly, a maniac.
He's a different cat, he's definitely a different cat. So can he lose his job? Absolutely. Is he playing rock and roll football like he did at Tottenham? I don't see it. It just feels like, for me, that the players just haven't taken to him. And I don't even understand why or how or whatever, but it just seems like they just don't mess with him. And that we can see on the pitch, unfortunately. But do you think players would self-sabotage in that way, because
I don't know, because I think as a footballer, you've got, listen, we mentioned it before, that Forest squad was built to play how Nuno played, which was very, I guess, held back a lot and had the wingers, had Chris Wood, had Gibbs White. It was essentially a team that was hard to break down, but also when he had the transitions and the counter-attack, they were very effective at doing that, very efficient with the ball. Didn't have much possession. But maybe, as you said, them trying to adjust to what Ange wants is the difficulty. But I don't think players would self-sabotage or sabotage a manager, because at the end of the day, you've still got your pride as a footballer. And also, you wouldn't want to play in a team or where the fans are always on your back. You wouldn't want that as a player. So, and again, you want to win games. So whether you like the manager or not, the decision's made. And as a footballer, you haven't got control of who gets appointed. I know at your club, Chelsea, there was rumours about players being quite influential about who got appointed, right? But for the rest of the clubs around the country, you're a footballer. So whoever gets appointed, you don't really have control of that. You're just there to kind of help the manager achieve his goals. And obviously, if the manager achieves his goals and wins games, you win games. And everyone's happy. So I don't think players will like self-sabotage, even if they had a great relationship with Nuno. We said it as well. His comments before being sacked were bizarre as well. So he didn't help himself.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's a tough one. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think players would sabotage. I feel like they're just kind of struggling, really. I mean, what do you think? Do you think Ange could turn it around? Do you feel like, listen, I thought they made a mistake getting rid of Nuno. But again, Marinakis wasn't given much choice because of his comments.
It's interesting. I mean, can he turn it around? If given time, I think, it's possible, but that's the one thing chairmans tend to not have is time, So I don't know, man. I feel like with the type of chairman they have, if things ain't corrected by maybe the second week after international break, the writing is most certainly on the wall.
They've got Chelsea when they come back. They'll be at home. That'll be an interesting game to see how Big Ange gets on there. But yes, it's not looking good so far. I'm sure you heard Russell Martin being sacked at Rangers as well.
Yeah.
Do you follow the Scottish Premiership at all, or
Not really, not really. Quite literally, if there's no Premier League games and it happens to be the Old Firm derby, then I might tune in. But otherwise, no interest.
no interest? Yeah. So Russell Martin got sacked by Rangers after it was probably 3-4 months in charge. So quite a disastrous tenure, clearly by how early the second was. But I don't know. You look at Russell Martin, and it kind of made me look. We spoke about it before we came on air, but obviously they've hired him because he's got a good philosophy. He again with Southampton did a good job there, bringing them up from the Championship, getting promoted. But then in the Premier League, his team just didn't turn up. Southampton were abysmal really for the season. Obviously he lost his job halfway through the season, and now we've got a job at Rangers, and that kind of led me to think about Vincent Kompany as well, because he did really well at Burnley. Played really exciting football, had a clear philosophy, got them promoted into the Premier League. But in the Premier League, he struggled. And then he gets rewarded with a job at Bayern Munich. So are we seeing a trend here of managers being rewarded for failure, if that makes sense? Because
it's interesting that you say failure, because it depends on how you kind of see things. Some might say
it's failure. If you get a team promoted and they get relegated when you bring them up, right, it's failure.
I mean, were you expected to stay up? No. So is it failure?
I know, but they didn't adapt. Though. They didn't adapt at all, which was strange to me.
Well, and this is how Kompany got the job at Bayern, because they liked his philosophy. They liked what he was trying to implement. They liked the style, and they figured, you know what, if given the players and the resources, this will work. And to be fair, looking at it now and looking at it from last season, they weren't wrong, and I agree with you. With certain teams, you should adapt and adjust your style, because that's how you will survive. But then you end up being pigeonholed as a manager, similar to Sean Dyche and others, where it's like, oh, you can only play a defensive way of football, and then that's just your career throughout, so you never get the opportunity to get jobs where you can express the flair and, creative style of the game, the beautiful game we love. So I guess you got to take your risk.
But a Kompany going to Bayern Munich, do we really? I mean, at Bayern Munich, can you really fail though? The resources they've got, the players they've got, the league. I wouldn't say it's the most competitive league. Bayern Leverkusen had a really good year where they won the Bundesliga. Yeah. Usually, typically, historically, Dortmund and Bayern are the ones who are competing for the trophy. So would we say that Kompany really tested himself going to Bayern Munich? Because let's just say he got a job at Valencia, for instance. Could he really elevate Valencia to the point where they're competing for the La Liga? Do you know what I mean? So him going to Bayern Munich, as much as it's a great thing, but is he really testing himself? I don't know.
I mean, look, we all know Bayern, you're only judged by your performance in the Champions League, right? So that's what his sole objective is. Of course, win the Bundesliga, because that's just bread and butter, food and drink. That's what it is. But you must win the Champions League. So I'm sure when he was interviewed for this role, he would have been given, probably in his plan by the year 2028, season 2028, going into 2029, we'll be Champions League winners. And if you don't get there, then you get fired. It's just what it is, So that's how I see that. Yeah, that's how I see that.
Yeah, good point. I mean, you're right. I think Bayern in the Champions League historically, that's the big one you have to win, because the Bundesliga is not a foregone conclusion, but more or less we know who's going to be competing for that trophy season in, season out. But yeah, I'll talk about Raheem Sterling actually. I know we spoke about him during the summer, what his future holds at Chelsea. Currently, he's been frozen out, part of the bomb squad, as they say at Chelsea, with him and Disasi. And I'm sure you probably saw his Instagram post where he posted his training session at, I think, was it 8:00 in the evening?
Yeah,
a random time to be training alone, to be honest. I mean, what's going on there? I mean, that's obviously your club. I mean, what's Sterling? We're talking about a footballer who's won the Premier League multiple times, a player who was very key at for England in the Euros and the World Cups that have gone by, and now he's been frozen out of Chelsea. We're not sure if he's going to find a new club. Is he being harshly treated?
Look, I mean, I wouldn't say harshly treated at 300,000 a week, even if you was getting 10K a week. You're supposed to stay fit, yes, and this, that, and whatever. So you got to train. It's not, to me, it's not a big deal. At the end of the day, we know how it goes. If you're not part of the squad, then you don't train with the squad. That's just how it goes. You don't have a
But
squad number.
yeah, do you feel like I mean, I get he's got a train, I get it, but do you feel like him training at 8 o'clock in evening time? Do you think that's necessary? Like, couldn't they have just found maybe a 3 o'clock slot for him, perhaps?
Maybe that they're training at 3 o'clock. So he's got to come in at 8 o'clock. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't know.
I get it.
I get what you're saying. Footballers are, listen, they're rewarded. They've got a lifestyle that we would only dream of having. And therefore, if they're going through things like this where they've been frozen out, it's not a massive deal. But you also look at it in terms of like, if you're an employee for a company, which we all are, and you've been frozen out and you've been told to maybe have lunch away from the office or maybe don't come into the office because of whatever reason, even though we work remotely and stuff, but for you to be frozen out that way where you can't interact with your colleagues, you can't eat in the same place, even though you're getting paid well, I think mentally it must be quite challenging, isn't it? And if that's the case, why is he not taking a pay cut and left Chelsea? That's the bizarre thing to me.
Man, when you're getting that kind of money, you can suffer a little bit, if you even want to call it that. Do you see what I mean? So I feel like, he would just look further afield in terms of going to Saudi or maybe even going to the MLS. I think the
Do you think
MLS would
Raheem
work
Sterling?
great.
Do you think he's still hungry? Do you think Raheem Sterling is still hungry? He's won a lot in his career. He's won a lot of trophies. Do you think he's still got that hunger?
We've been playing professional football at the highest level from the age of 16. I think you're okay not to be hungry. Did you get what I mean? I think it's fair. He's won everything. I think it's fair not to be hungry. I think it's fair to do what you want at this point. And I think it's fair to say, well, I'm not leaving until I get, all the money that's owed to me. I think all of that is more than fair. If you remember, Gareth Bale did the same thing at Madrid. He wasn't getting any game time. He wasn't getting nothing, no love or anything. But mate, I'm getting 500,000-600,000 a week. I'm just gonna sit here and chill. I'll stay fit, no problem. It's your job to find me alone. It's your job to pay me off. It's not my job to do any of these things. You guys signed the contract. So for me, if I'm him, I'm chilling. I am not stressing about it at all. This is on them. That's on the club. And you know what? The agreement is the agreement. Do you see what I mean? I think it's unfair for us to look at him in any odd way. Those are the terms of his employment contract, and so far as he shows up to training and this, that, and the other, he's not in breach. We've seen other players which will go in breach of their contracts, and say I'm not playing and whatever, and do things to deliberately get a move. He's there ready to play if they need to call on him. You know what I'm saying? So,
you're right. I think it's a lesson to football clubs. You offer these wages, you offer these contracts. Obviously, at the time, they believed he was worth that money, but in hindsight now, you're probably thinking, well, should we have signed him for that long on a contract? And he's obviously sitting there with nothing to do. Essentially, his weekends are free. Essentially, he's just training during the weekend and being left out during the weekend. But we'll see how Sterling gets on and where he's at this time in January, or maybe this time next season.
Yeah.
Quick one. Jordi Alba in Inter Miami have confirmed that he will retire at the end of the season. A great left back for Barcelona. Obviously, was at Valencia, then came to Barcelona and was part of that great team in 2015 that won the Champions League for Barcelona. How would you rank him among the best left backs we've seen in the last sort of 15 years?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, man, phenomenal left back, very energetic, could get up and down the pitch, no problem. Had a good final third delivery as well. And he was decisive sometimes in some of the games. Someone who you could call a big game player. So for me, I think one of the best left backs of his generation for sure. And he's won it all. And yeah, man, happy retirement when it comes.
Yeah, I agree. I think, look at him going to Barcelona. We've had great left backs historically. I think when he went to Barcelona, he didn't look out of place. Obviously Spanish international, great for the Spain national team as well. Great left back. Great left back. He was among the very best in the last 10, 15 years. Hands down. No question about that. To finish off, Gary Neville had a lot to say. Nothing to do with football though. as always. It's funny, his podcast is called Stick to Football, but Gary Neville's not done that. No, he's got himself into a bit of trouble. With his comments regarding the Union Jack flag. Do you think that? I know. Listen, Gary Neville, he's obviously works in sports, but at the same time, he is a public figure. He's going to have opinions on public affairs. But do you think that people who work in sports should have, if they have those opinions, which they should have, but do you think they should be made public to be criticised?
I mean, look, at the end of the day, you're a public figure, you're a sportsman, whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, you are still just a human being with your own opinions and whatnot. He gave his opinion as Gary Neville on Gary Neville's platform, not on Stick to Football, not on any other platform. So he's speaking for himself. And so for me, I think that's absolutely fine. Not a problem at all. Funny, I saw a video where they had the when he was playing, the national anthem was going.
I saw that as well, yeah.
You saw that video, right? Everyone was singing the national anthem except for Gary Neville.
Do you know what? So that same video, Rooney wasn't singing it as well, Rooney wasn't singing it either.
Oh, Rooney also wasn't singing it?
Yeah,
okay.
Singing, yeah.
So, but Rooney's not the one coming out to say anything. It's Gary coming out to say stuff. So it's actually quite interesting that he's showing his patriotism. But I don't think he said anything necessarily wrong. He doesn't want the flag to be seen in a negative way and this, that, and whatever. So I think okay. That's your opinion, and you have your right. It's your right to I guess express your opinion.
That's true. I don't think people had. I think people just had the view of that. This man's a very privileged man. He's had a great career. He's made money off the works of the back of people who are working class, who've paid Sky subscriptions over the years, who've gone to watch him play for Man United, who've travelled around the world to watch him play for England at different major tournaments. So it's like for him to then criticise those same people and say they're the reason why our country's divided. I think that's where they kind of took offence to that, his comments. Like he can have an opinion, but we've also seen with people like Gary Lineker, who've had an opinion in the past about politics, which has ultimately led him to leave BBC after so many years. Yeah. Sky have been clear about their stance on it. They're going to back Gary Neville. They're not going to sack him as many want them to do. Sky known for being quite loyal to their staff. And Jeremy Carragher spat a girl years ago, and he still works there now. So I can't see Sky being disloyal, apart from obviously Richard Keys and Andy Gray, who got let go in 2011 for their comments at the time. But I just think that sports people, again, I agree with you, they can have an opinion, but I still feel like they've got to be careful because they live in a different world to and if you come out and maybe make comments about working class people who've paid your wages for 20 odd years, then you've got to be careful about your comments, because unless you're prepared to back them up with your money and go and fund all these immigrants or fund or play a part in the crisis that this country's facing, unless you're willing to do that with your own money, then you've got to be very careful what you come out and say, because this country is facing a lot of challenges right now. We're football fans. This is a football podcast, but at the same time, we're people, like you mentioned, and we're all affected by it, right? So for these people to come out and maybe make these comments, I think they've got to think twice before they really sort of come out and cause division with their comments as well, I have to say.
Yeah. It is interesting, but I'd like just to add, just to wrap up, because I can see his face posted in your studio. We also have a retiree in Sergio Busquets, one of the greatest defensive midfielders the game has seen, definitely a great in his generation. I would say in some ways has also redefined the role by way of not having to be so physical, but using your football IQ to read the game, intercept the ball, and make passes, and be the canvas in which the rest of the team can paint. So yeah, what's your thoughts on Busquets' career?
I agree with what you said. A great football player. The first player I saw really, we talk about Makelele, but Busquets was the first player I really saw kind of make a huge difference playing that position. Think about it, when we grew up, we didn't have players who did certain jobs in midfield. Everyone did everything. They were box to box. They scored goals. They tackled. They defended. Whereas players like Busquets, Makelele, Kante, they really redefined their position, if that makes sense. Playing the great Barcelona team, and we talk about Messi and likes of VR, Xavi, Iniesta, but Busquets was integral to that team and how they function, like Rodri is at Man City. You take these players out the football team, it's not the same team. So I agree with everything you said there. Great footballer. Do you think it's funny though that him, Alba, Messi, Suarez have this mini reunion in Inter Miami?
It's crazy, right? I think Inter Miami were trying to, go into the archives, you know what I mean, and try and
who knows? Maybe we might see Messi retire next and Suarez retire next. Do you know what I mean? And
I know Suarez with his knees and things like that. They say he's in constant pain, etc. So I think he will definitely be one of the next to retire at the game. And when he does, we'll be right here to talk about it.
Absolutely, Flex, and that's a great way to finish off today. Guys, again, as always, thanks for watching. Subscribe on the road to 100 subscribers. Don't forget to like our content on Instagram as well. Follow us on Instagram or on Twitter as well, by the way, on TikTok also. So keep an eye out for our content. Flex, it's been an honor as always, and we'll catch you next week.
100%, my man. Take care, guys.
You too.